It's your Locked On Flyers podcast for Thursday, November 3rd. Your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that honestly just wants to give Felix Sandstrom a big hug.
We talked about this.
All right, we're going to get into last night's Leafs game coming up now.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, Flyers fans. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here, as always, with the brilliant Russ Cohen, who's on Twitter at Sportsology. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On Flyers. That's where you'll keep up to date with our episodes and Flyers news. You can also email the show at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. On today's show, in addition to recapping last night's game against Toronto, we are going to give you a prospect profile of Mason Millman, which is a really interesting development case. Locked On Flyers is free and available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you're listening right now. So subscribe. You'll get all of our episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Plus, we're over on YouTube, so subscribe there as well. Russ, Felix Sandstrom, man, I feel for this guy so much because in addition to him getting this start in the second half of the back-to-back, again, they took out Morgan Frost and Justin Braun, who is one of the more reliable defensive guys out there, which could have helped protect him a little bit more, I would say. I'm glad Tanner Lazinski got to go back in if Frost was the guy that had to come out. But man, I think this all kind of converged to lead to a huge number of shots against.
It did. I mean, again, I would have preferred Sealer to be out, who ended up in the penalty box, and Braun to play the offside. Like he played the offside for the Rangers. It's no problem. He's done it in his career. Then Zamula comes in. There's no problem with Zamula. I think that would have shored things up. They definitely could not have gotten weaker on defense if they tried. And for a goalie that doesn't have an NHL win, again, they hung him out to dry. They gave a good effort for a lot of the game, but I kind of knew this was going to happen. I had told Michael Jello off air that they were either going to win this game by surprise or lose this game by a lot. And they lost it by a lot because they did that. They took out Morgan Frost, who, again, I don't think John Tortorella realizes for the few minuses he might have for him, he is handling the middle of the ice pretty well, and he does have some playmaking ability that may not be fully showing up now, but does help in a game where, so now you took him out, you switched up everything. At some point, Zach McEwen ended up on the second line. Like that is complete.
Yes.
That is complete desperation, considering he should never be on the third line. But again, this is what this coach is doing and rewarding guys because they play hard. Again, playing hard is nice. Having actual skill is nice too. And that was the one thing, a lot of fans were mad at Travis Sanheim. There was nothing he could do on that John Tavares goal. That is just greatness from John Tavares.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that Tavares goal. And just as a side note, Tavares getting that hat trick plus an assist was especially impressive because he only had 12:43 of ice
Which is
time
crazy.
because of all the penalties, because he
Yes.
doesn't play on the PK.
No.
So it was absolute madness. So super impressed with John Tavares in that game. But going back to the Flyers, I think, the situation, and Torts mentioned this to some degree, but is missing the second half of this, in that the battle was initially there in the defensive zone. Then they were hemmed in quite a bit, and the battle was there, and then they would get the puck sort of away from the Leafs player, but then couldn't maintain possession of it and make the plays to clear the zone. And I think that's where the playmaking ability that you were just talking about was missing from this
Yes.
one.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I really think the Flyers fired up Toronto because, like you said, Toronto was dominating. Farabee gets a great goal, and Toronto's probably looking at themselves like, "Wow, we deserve better than that." And then Konechny started up with Tavares, right? Gave him like a shot in the face. I think it was Konechny, and I think that was like in the second period. And I think at some point the Leafs were just like, you know what? We're going to have the puck, and we are just going to turn the offense on, and we're going to see what you can do with us when we do that. And they couldn't hang with them. And at the end of the game, I didn't understand why Konechny was going after Matthews. I had to ask around, and apparently that Matthews play between the legs where he was going for like the sixth goal annoyed him. And it's like, listen, if we're going to get to the point where John Tortorella is going to put it in your head that nobody could showboat against this team and you have to make them pay, that's bad because then you're going to have overreactions like you did at the end of the game. And again, D'Angelo overreacted at the end of the game. He's just a guy looking for a fight. You could see that now, right?
Oh, absolutely, and he made a ton of mistakes
He
in
did.
that game. This was a prime example of the downside of Tony D'Angelo because you weren't getting the upside offensively, and he was making mistakes and causing turnovers that really hurt a team defensively, and
Yeah.
it was we knew this was a risk signing this guy because of these issues that he has, so the combination of getting hot-headed plus having the mistakes, I think you gotta be really careful with how you use him in these games,
I mean, he's your top pairing
especially
guy. He has to change because
right,
he's a top pairing guy. He can't play the same way.
right, exactly. And I think that, when you are trying to figure out how to get the puck out of the zone and it's not working for you, Tony D'Angelo is not your guy.
No.
Like, he's just not in these circumstances. I do wanna go back to the Konechny Matthews situation,
Yeah.
though, because there's a tremendous breakdown on Twitter, that Mike Rupp posted
Okay.
of, that I will link in the show notes of how Auston Matthews avoids conflict and gets
Mhm.
other people called and, like, just basically stands around and smiles while
Mhm.
everybody else is fighting around him, and he doesn't, quote, unquote, "support his teammates" in these situations, and it's part of the, I think, mystique or, intensity of the Toronto fan base and media around the Leafs, but it's a very funny thing, and,
I get it,
I
but he also had a bad wrist that kept him out, and they can't
yeah.
afford him having a fight and hurting his wrist again. That's I think it's as much about that too.
Oh, I'm sure, but this is apparently a pattern with him, and I
Yeah,
just thought it
yeah.
was funny that, somebody really broke it down, like, frame by frame what was
That's
going
funny.
on in that situation. But, I do wanna kinda swing back to special teams in
Mhm.
this game because, uh, I think that, the PK, which has been pretty solid, really let them down after that first period. Those first 2 PKs at the beginning, they shouldn't have gotten in the box like that, especially Travis Konechny, on that second one, but, after that, for the 3rd and 4th power play for the Leafs, they allowed 3 shots on goal in each of them, including goals being scored,
Yeah,
and I really think that, just the personnel wasn't there. I think Frost has spent some time on the PK
he
as
has.
well and does pretty well on it, so maybe that's another element that was missing there.
Yeah, it's possible, and Braun too.
Mhm,
Braun's definitely a
mhm.
PK guy. So yeah, they definitely were missing that element. They were and it's funny, because of the effort they gave, I'm not gonna tell you they tired out 5 on 5. I'm just gonna tell you that, again, they, put too much energy into the wrong things. It's fine to, finish your checks and do everything else, but, if you wanna use Zach McEwen as a prime example, that last penalty, it's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Like, there's no way you have a chance of catching up in the game with dumb plays like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Then you look at the power play side of things, 6 chances, only 1 goal, 2
Yeah,
of them with 0 shots on goal. The Leafs were in a rut on the PK over the last stretch, and there is absolutely no reason that the Flyers shouldn't have been able to take advantage of it. I did not like what they put out there for PP2 with
mhm,
Farabee, Cates, Provy, Bellows, and Allison. I don't think that's a good combination per se. I don't like Bellows on the power play right now. I just don't think he's there yet with the Flyers in
I
terms
agree.
of cohesiveness.
I agree. I think that probably jumbled it up too much. You can make the argument Farabee probably should be on power play 1.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I do think there's a problem with that. And look, I thought Bellows had a pretty good game, had a nice toe drag, he had a chance at a goal. Tippett's goal was nice, although I thought Samsonov should have been able to stop that, but still, he shot it on his off foot. Good shot on the short side. That was nice to see. Very few bright spots though, and the problem with the coach after a game like this, it's just like, yeah, we're not good enough. We're still not there, whatever. But he will never get into details. A few guys annoyed him, so clearly Sanheim annoyed him because on the bench you could see Torts was just cursing, cursing, cursing after that Tavares goal where he went around him, and I'm sure he was mad at a few other guys because maybe it shouldn't have been all up to Sanheim. But if you're not going to call your guys out and you're going to not give out many details, you're just really leaving it up to us to decide what's wrong with this team. And right now, they had the same problems against the Rangers. The only difference was they didn't have Carter Hart, and that's not a slight on Sandstrom. It just shows you how Carter Hart can keep the score down for a mediocre team.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more to talk about. I wanna
Oh yeah,
talk more about Sandstrom and what we learned from the back-to-back overall, and we will do that after we hear about BetOnline.
BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your football betting needs this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news and podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including the World Series, NHL, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Check out Locked On Sports today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports today, available on the app you're listening to right now, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Russ, I want to talk a little bit more about Felix Sandstrom because the fact that he faced 44 shots, even considering they had 19 additional blocked shots
Yeah,
in that game, I mean, that's brutal. Plus, there was the skate blade thing on the fifth goal, which,
yeah,
man, that's just
that's
like
rough.
it is so rough. I will say he's not as good at controlling rebounds as Hart is,
No,
for the most part, but the D didn't help him very much with clearing those pucks either.
no, and I'm also going to tell you, I'm finding this around the league. But what I'm finding is the Flyers are not rising to the occasion with the backup goalie in there. Like, hey, we got our backup in, so now we're gonna have to play extra better defense tonight, right, guys? Because we don't have Carter Hart in. They didn't do that. They just didn't
Yeah.
do that. And you feel for the kid. I mean, and look, and Tortorella said something like, "Hey, we got to do better." But like, you set up that lineup, like you started him to not do better, right, right from the get go. So these 2 games we knew were going to be important. Uh, they dropped both. Yes, they got a point, fine, but they dropped both. And now they're gonna go to Ottawa with Claude Giroux, and there's gonna be a whole dynamic there, and maybe it'll be the Giroux revenge game. Wouldn't shock anybody if that happens. So you kinda wonder where the Flyers are right now. The record's kinda closing in a little, after the good start. The play is sort of fallen off a little, and you basically have the same players there. It's not like you're getting anybody off injured reserve anytime soon.
Yeah, but going back to Sandstrom,
Mhm.
I'm wondering, I've been looking at the schedule over the next couple weeks and saying, what game do you give him in order to give him the best shot at success? Now, I like you just said, it absolutely depends on the personnel and the strategy of the defense in terms of, giving him the support that he needs. That's absolutely step 1. But step
Yes.
2, let's give him a game that's not the second half of a back to back. And, we unfortunately we do have another back to back coming up, the 12th and 13th versus Ottawa and Dallas. And in theory, you give him that Ottawa game, being the first half of it, but that's Giroux's homecoming, which is like a second game against
I would not
Ottawa,
give
which
that
is
game to him.
no, you can't do that, which is unfortunate. You're going to have to probably play him against Dallas, which
Yep.
is not ideal given how Dallas is playing right now. And then, I think the next best options are Tuesday versus St. Louis or the 15th at Columbus. But I think the 15th is too far away. Like
It is too far away.
I just like the St. Louis game is the one that makes the most sense to me at this point.
Boy, I don't think I'd wanna do that either, though.
I know. I know. That's what I'm saying is that this schedule is really brutal in terms of trying to give him a chance at
I
success.
guess give him the game on the 10th against the Blue Jackets, but still, that's maybe the best chance.
I don't know, Russ. I think that it's a real difficult situation, and
It
I
is.
think that they really have to think about who they're putting out there. And like we've talked about, if you're gonna have Sandstrom in net, you have to have Justin Braun in the
You
lineup.
have to.
I I firmly believe that.
He's probably
It
your 3rd best defenseman, maybe
Mhm.
4th,
I
depending.
absolutely believe that. And you also alluded to, the dropping the second half of the back to back. The Flyers are 0-3 in the second half of back to backs. And that is something that they really need to solve. They need to figure out how to adjust the lineup. They
Mhm.
need to figure out how to prepare for those games differently so that they can be as efficient as possible in the first game so they're not completely exhausted for the second game. And then in that second game, they just have to dig deeper. And I know you can only do so much with this personnel, but at the same time, like you have to have a clear strategy and do the prep to come into the game in such a way that you can give yourself the best chance.
Right, and I heard Tortorella say that, for as much as they're playing in their own end, that they have to do more with the puck to get it out of the zone and all that. Well, that's great. That's what you should be doing in practice. You should be figuring out who are the guys that you can count on to do that, and, Morgan Frost should be one of them. But taking Frost out of this for a minute, you should be figuring out who could do that. Who is going to do that? Who is going to be there when the chips are down like that so you can get the puck out and not just simply dump it out for another icing. And, that's the odd part of this because the early John Tortorella coaching was, "Hey, you can play in your end all you want. We're just gonna keep blocking your shots, whatever, and tiring you out." I think he is starting to see that teams do not tire out from that anymore. Teams are so offensive and they have so many offensive guys that you're not gonna frustrate them by shooting the puck. Like, you're not.
No, and the other thing is that, we're approaching sort of the 10 game into the season mark for a bunch
Yes.
of teams, and that, we talked about in the beginning when the Flyers were getting lucky and were getting outplayed but still finding ways to win, that other teams, were also trying to find their rhythm. Everybody's in the same
Yes.
boat, and now is when teams start to really begin to gel
Oh, yeah.
and the Flyers aren't gonna get lucky anymore.
No, no, the
They
luck's
have to
gone.
work for it.
Yeah, that they have to work for it, and it's not that their work ethic is bad. The work ethic is really good. The coaches instilled that. It's all the rest. All the rest has to sort of click in now. There has to be better defense. There has to be better breakouts. There has to be not just keeping guys to the outside. Keeping guys to the outside is fine, but as you see when you play against elite players and elite teams, like a guy like John Tavares could be on the outside, and then all of a sudden he's on the inside. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
you can't just use that as a blanket strategy.
absolutely. Well, I do wanna try and end the discussion about this back-to-back and the Leafs game on a slightly higher note. So I do want to give them a little bit of credit that the faceoffs were above 50%. They were at
They were.
53% again.
Although
So
Lawton
that's
was at 40, that's a little concerning.
yes, but Kevin Hayes 14-5.
Yeah.
That is really good and
He
a
turned it on that
significant
game.
improvement. He
He did.
really did. I thought he had a good game overall.
He did. He
Uh,
was their best player, I felt. I know
yeah,
Konechny had 2 assists, but he was their best player.
I think Konechny's game, I think he made some tactical errors, but his
Yeah.
underlying numbers were pretty good and were the best on the team overall for that game in terms of expected goals and all of that. And he had 6 scoring chances. But I think that Kevin Hayes, from start to finish, had the best game overall. So I do want to give him credit for that.
No, and he deserves that, and I think, at some point I should say if Cam Atkinson comes back, because 'cause I'm at that point now, um, you might have to have an adult conversation about connecting and trading him when his value is high. Today is not the day, but there'll be a day for that.
Yeah, well, we will, I'm sure, be starting to discuss that stuff after the new year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
All right, when we come back, we are going to switch gears and talk about the curious case of Mason Millman. Russ, we have talked about Mason Millman before, a fourth round pick from 2019, and he had 2 pretty great seasons in the OHL when he was
Mhm,
a prospect, 44 points in 54 games in 2019-20, and he struggled pretty mightily in his first year as a pro,
mhm.
adjusting even to the AHL game, and his decision making was really not up to par, and, I think that because of all of that, they decided to send him to Reading,
Mhm.
and, he did well in Reading last season. I think he took the opportunity and played a pretty solid game, and they just never called him back up to the Phantoms to give him a real shot. And then this year, I thought his camp was pretty good.
It was, but there were some warning signs, not from necessarily what he was doing, but how he was being used, and I just felt like a lot of it, he just wasn't getting any opportunities. So I knew he had no chance to make the team, but I thought for sure that he could make the Phantoms. I still think he,
Yeah.
I still think he should be there. Thanks to Instead, I've got some really good stats on him from even from Reading that you don't get to see. I mean, his time on the ice is good, 2307. Um, that's fine. Power play, shorthanded, he's doing all that. Um, Penalties, not great. Like his penalties time for and against is a wash. It shouldn't be if you're a really good offensive defenseman. His hits are up, so he is doing that part and he's winning puck battles. But I think the points factor is I think he's probably a little bit in the doldrums, thinking I proved myself last year. I got out of this and he's not. And so you do wonder now what this is going to do to his overall development because unless there are injuries, he's not getting called up to Lehigh Valley.
No, they seem pretty set there with the personnel they have, and it's pretty well balanced in terms of quote unquote prospect defensemen and veteran defensemen for the pairings. And I there just doesn't seem to be room. And obviously, based on those stats you just talked about, Mason isn't doing anything to demand it. But I
Mhm.
certainly can understand, being frustrated
Yeah.
because it does feel like he did everything he could to try and put himself in a position to be on the Phantoms this year to maybe give himself that one last shot. And it just isn't happening, and I just wonder for a player when they get into a situation like that, like, can he dig his way out of this?
Yeah, he can. I've seen guys do it. The problem is, at 21, you want him to start like getting roots, and he hasn't gotten roots anywhere. He hasn't gotten roots in Lehigh. He had roots last year in Reading, and now he's going to do that again. At 21, it's not exactly the place I want him to be. You want him to be there if the Phantoms are so good on defense that okay, look, there's nothing the Flyers can do here. They have too many guys. Okay. Too many guys. You're going to have to put them in Reading for a little while until something shakes out. There's an injury, whatever. That's fine. But I mean, there are guys in Lehigh that, like, I'll just say it, Louis Belpedio. Like, I understand that he has NHL experience, and I understand that he's a pretty good puck transporter in the AHL. But at the end of the day, you want Mason Millman to possibly help you in the future, where Louis Belpedio is only going to help you for this year. And whatever he's going to do, he's going to do. Kevin Connaughton, I get, because that's a
Right.
legit NHL call-up guy. But Belpedio, that's pretty much who's blocking him.
Yeah, it just bugs me that this is what they have chosen to do, and again, I understand some of the off-season signings for the Phantoms because you need some
Yeah.
AHL level talent, but if it gets in the way of a prospect development who has shown that they wanna take that next step, that's where I get confused. I am curious, though, if there's any comparison to be made with his situation and Samu Tuomaala's situation in terms of guys that have been given chances and then just aren't getting there? Or is it really that Millman put in the effort and was being successful where Tuamala just wasn't?
Okay, so the first thing I do want to say is Belpedio is 26, so I wanted to get that out of the way. Um, and I also wanted to get out of the way. The reason I say that Millman's not getting called up is because with Cam York out, if he can't get called up, he's never getting called up. That's that was the reason I made that statement. As far as in relation to Tuamala, Tuamala wants to play, is playing now in the lower league, so it's kind of like a little bit of a step back for him. He is scoring a little bit, but still, right now this year hasn't played a lot of games. Didn't play much last year, so he's kind of caught up in the, well, he's just not good enough to be at one level, and so now he's at, was it Mestis, the other level, and right now we're having him there for a whole season. It's not ideal. If you were a first year guy, maybe. He's your second round draft pick. You thought you had a deal worked out. You had Sammy Kapanen watching him. All that failed. So now, and he's not going to go to the OHL after next year. So now it's either going to be back overseas or AHL, because he's going to be 20 by then. And yeah, he turns 20 in January. So right now, it's completely failing for Tuamala. He could turn it around, but this is partially on the team, partially on circumstance, partially on the player. With Millman, he had injury and such. He had a really good year with Reading. They made the playoffs. You don't want Millman to be there just to make the playoffs again. You want him to be
Right,
like a little bit, at least a step closer. And even if Millman has to play 3 years in the AHL, so be it. But
right.
by the time he plays 3 years in the AHL, he'll be like 24.
Yeah,
If he goes at this rate. So I do feel like he's behind in his production, and I don't feel like it's all his fault. And so, like, right now, I think that's another guy where you look at him and you say, he just might not develop for this organization, or he might end up in a trade. Something may happen like that. And so when these things happen and you ask yourself and you go back, and this is when it's hard, and this is why I never go back and draft or redraft a draft, is because, you start looking at these guys and you say, well, why hasn't this worked out? Now, of course, for the 19 draft, Cam York, he's going to work out. Addard, he's going to work out. Brink, I don't know, injury wise, right? It was always going to be an injury risk. We may not see Brink this year. He's in the press box, but we may not see him. Then after that, you got Millman, Igor Serduyic, who, is not anywhere right now. Roddy Ross, who's not anywhere close to coming into the NHL, and Bryce Brzezinski, who, yeah, right now, Roddy Ross is playing in Canadian high school. It looks like. See, no, actually, it's not high school, but it's a level above that. That's the rest of that draft's going to fall out. So that was supposed to be a big draft because they traded for extra picks, right? And I don't know. That draft could be just okay. In the end, it could be okay, but it could be a lot better if Millman works out for you, knowing that these other ones are going to fail, right? All these other ones, even Brzezinski, who looks pretty good, he's probably going to fail in the long run. So York and Adard, maybe Brink, and if you don't get Millman, it's going to be mixed results on that draft.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point to be made, and that is where we'll have to end it for today. Thanks for listening. We will be back again tomorrow with a preview of that matchup against Ottawa, playing Claude Giroux for the first time. It's going to be a little weird, but we'll get through it. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. Send in your mailbag questions via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It's the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.